Elvira, the arcade game, is different than a lot of the other games I've done because there's no real copper tricks to speak of, and there's no sprites at all. But what it does boast is the only game I've found on OCS Amiga so far that has full screen, non-repeating, 8-color parallax without dual playfield mode. So you can see the parallax as we walk here. But even as we go downwards, there's more background parallax. And you can see as we go up here that the background is multiple screens high and then multiple screens low as we fall farther down. And all this is in 32 color mode, 5 bitplanes, which is quite rare for the Amiga to have this kind of parallax with 32 colors. The other most prominent ones are Lollipop, which I did a video on, and Flimbo's Quest. But the thing is with both of those, the backgrounds aren't full screen. So here's the palette visualizer. It's 32 colors up here and then 32 different colors down here. So with the copper visualizer on, you can see that that split is right here for the palette. And that corresponds to the HUD, which is down here. So the HUD has a different palette than the playable area up here. So with the palette visualizer, we've got 60 colors. And then in-game at this point, we've got 54 colors. What makes this game interesting, though, is how they do the parallax. So I said it was 5 bitplanes, so let's take the bitplanes off and go bitplane 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's all 32 colors. But if you just put on bitplane 0, 1, and 2, then you've got all the colors for the background just in those 3 bitplanes. So 3 bitplanes is 8 colors. Watch when I put on the next bitplanes, it won't affect the background at all. Bitplane 3, Bitplane 4 doesn't affect it. So the background has 8 colors, and with the palette visualizer, you can actually see them. And it's the first 8 colors here. So you've got these purple and pinks, the peach color, the blue, the green, and the white. So if you look in the background here, you got the blue, the white, the peach, the purple and pinks, and the green. And those colors can also be used in the foreground. So you have this green here, and then there's a bit of that green also here. But the other colors that are created by bitplane 3 and 4 are not used in the background. And instead of dual playfield, which has the hardware scrolling both the foreground and the background, here it uses the blitter to scroll the background. So if we put on the blitter visualizer, you can see it's blitting Elvira, and then it's blitting the background, and it's blitting the 2 strips on each side. And then it also blits enemies and the explosions. But yeah, no matter where you go, it's always blitting the background. But it only needs to blit 3 bitplanes and not all 5. But if you take off just the background bitplane, so bitplane 0, 1, and 2, then you're left with just the foreground, and Elvira is a silhouette. And then if you put all the bitplanes back on, then you're back to 32 colors. And I discovered that bitplane 4 is only used on Elvira and on the enemies. So if I flick between bitplane 4 off and on, you can see it just affects in the playable area Elvira and the enemies. Another thing I noticed that's interesting is look at the score colors here. You know how they look like they're copperized? But if you look at the palette here, what they're actually using all these palette entries to sort of fake copperization. It might have made more sense to use less bitplanes for down here and then just change the color with the copper down here, but they decided not to do that. I guess it wouldn't affect the speed too much since this bottom part isn't scrolling or anything. So speaking of speed, that's what we'll dig into now, and that's one of the drawbacks of this whole setup of this game, is that because it's 32 colors and that it has this 8-color parallax, there's some obvious compromises. First of all, the visible area is very small. It's 256 across and 200 down, but that includes the HUD here. So the actual playable area is only 160, and then the HUD is 40. So it's really 256 by 160 playable area. So that is on the very low end of Amiga games, but it also does things that other games can't do. And the other downside is that you're limited to 25 frames per second throughout the game. If you saw my last video on Blaze, you know I was theorizing that with a good programmer and with a smaller than 320 by 256 screen, that with 25 frames per second you can pretty much do anything. Well, this game sort of proves and disproves that. The tweak of the theory is that for 16-color 4-bit playing games, 25 frames per second can pretty much do anything. But with 32 color games, there may be other limits. With Blaze, there was no background parallax. With the Blitter, it was sprite parallax. If you want the quickest, best looking Amiga games, I think dual playfield or 16 color with sprite parallax is the way to get 50 frames per second and a big screen. But it's interesting to see these alternatives that tried alternate means. So let's delve into the frames per second. First, I'll walk into this scene normally. There'll be three big bees that come at me and all these big explosions. Now, if I do it again and I slow it down frame by frame, when all three are on the screen, right here, you can see that it holds 25 frames per second. Here's frame, 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 frame. So every other frame, everything moves, Elvira and the three big wasps. What it can't handle at 25 frames per second, though, is the huge explosions. So watch the frames per second counter when we start seeing the explosions. It's 16.7. So with the explosions, it drops it to 16.7, which is once every third frame. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, actually. There it drops to 12.5, which is every fourth frame. And the slowest that I've seen it, usually with the explosions, can hold 16.7. And without explosions and with as many enemies as I've seen on the screen, it always holds 25. But these explosions are too much. So we'll go into the scene with the Blitter visualizer and watch all the blits once we do the explosions. Look at it, it's blitting everywhere, and that's just overwhelms it and brings the frames per second down. So there's a few things they could have probably done to help this. One, make the explosions a lot less dramatic, although they do look nice. And two, which is the biggest for me, is why they didn't make Elvira a sprite. Elvira's jumping animation is very slow and kind of floaty, and I think it's something that would bother a lot of people about the game. So turning her into a sprite instead may have helped, because then you have a lot less to blit, and you can move her around at 50 frames per second and a much more agile way. The only reason I could think is maybe they didn't want to take too many palette slots away from the 32 color game by having a lot of them taken up by the sprite colors. Or maybe they just didn't think of it or didn't have the time. I read that the game was parallel development with the DOS and Atari ST. The Atari ST also had Parallax. It wasn't as extensive, but it was probably all done by the CPU. And then the DOS version also had Parallax, and it was very similar to the Amiga one, but from watching it on long plays, it looks pretty jerky. Looks like the Amiga version is the best version, and they tried to tailor it by using the Blitter, but it didn't use sprites. So maybe if they had more time with the Amiga version, they would have tried that. I'd love to know how it would have affected the game, and if maybe they could have kept everything at 25 frames per second, even the explosions, if Elvira was a sprite. Here's another one of the levels, and again, something they could have used sprites for was the snowflakes. But with the Blitter visualizer, you can see that they blit every single one, but they're all at 25 frames per second. This parallax looks really nice. And again, it's just using the first three bitplanes. So bitplane 0, 1, and 2. That gives you this whole nice background. And with the palette visualizer, you can see again that it's the first 8 colors, the greens and pink and white. And the next two bitplanes don't affect it. So 3 and 4 only do the foreground. And Elvira and the enemies. With the blitting of the snowflakes and with 3 enemies, it can still maintain 25 frames per second some of the time, like for instance here, frame, 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 but it does drop to 16.7 more often in this snow level than the first one, I think. So if the snowflakes and Elvira were both done with hardware sprites, that may have made it a little quicker, but again, we'll never know for sure. I think for my next video, I might do Blues Brothers Jukebox Adventure, and that game is the only 32 color game with full background sprite parallax that is at 50 frames per second that I've found so far. So I like to study and look at all the games that have parallax but don't use dual playfield. But at the end of the day, it still feels kind of like dual playfield gives you the best of all worlds. But I appreciate the makers of Elvira, the arcade game, trying something different. And it's actually quite a fun game to play through, at least if you follow a long play, which I did last year and played through the whole game with a long play. And it was quite fun. Without a long play, it might be a little confusing. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and please like and subscribe and comment if you haven't. Thanks so much. Till next time, take care.